The air in the Harris home was thick with unspoken tension, a familiar storm brewing beneath the surface of a seemingly ordinary afternoon. Tiffany, a woman described as a light by those who knew her, moved through the living room with a quiet purpose. Her hands busy with a chore she was likely doing to distract herself. Her two sons, Adim and his older brother, were nearby, their youthful energy muted by the palpable strain between their mother and her boyfriend. It wasn't the first time they had felt this way, and each of them knew the familiar path this particular silence would take. The first words were spoken in a low, controlled tone, but they cut through the quiet like a knife. The boyfriend initiated the argument, his voice laced with frustration over a recurring issue that had plagued their relationship. Tiffany's responses were initially measured, an attempt to de-escalate, to find a common ground that had long since eroded. Yet, with every retort, the volume and intensity of the conversation increased, turning a simple disagreement into a full-blown confrontation. The boys exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of the impending chaos. What began as a verbal spat quickly morphed into something more volatile. Accusations and resentments, buried deep beneath the surface of their daily lives, were now being hurled back and forth without restraint. Tiffany, who had always strived to be a beacon of positivity for her children, found herself trapped in a cycle of anger she couldn't escape. Her boyfriend's temper flared, and the argument became less about the initial point of contention and more about raw, unfiltered emotion. The house, a place that should have been a sanctuary, was now an arena for their conflict. The argument moved from the living room to another part of the house, perhaps a hallway or a kitchen, drawing the boys with it. They were not mere spectators. They were a part of the scene, their presence a silent weight on the unfolding drama. Adim, at just 14, was caught in the middle, a young boy burdened by adult problems he couldn't comprehend or control. His older brother, perhaps more accustomed to these fights, tried to appear nonchalant, but his eyes betrayed a deep-seated anxiety. They were both silently pleading for the fight to end. The dispute reached its fever pitch. The voices were no longer just angry. They were filled with a palpable fury. Every word was a blow, a strike to the foundation of their fragile family unit. Tiffany's pleas for calm were ignored, and the boyfriend's rage was a force of nature, unstoppable and all-consuming. The air was thick with the scent of a storm that was about to break, a promise of violence that hung heavy in the atmosphere. It was in this moment of peak fury that the first act of violence occurred. The argument, which had been confined to words, crossed a terrible line. The sound of a gunshot ripped through the air, an ear-shattering exclamation mark on the end of their fight. It was a sound so final, so terrifying, that it seemed to freeze time itself. The older brother recoiled, his face a mask of pure shock and disbelief. The boyfriend crumpled, the initial victim of a tragedy that was just beginning to unfold. He had been shot multiple times, and the life he had once taken for granted was now ebbing away from him. The sound of the shots echoed in the silence that followed, a chilling reminder of the violence that had been unleashed. The boys watched, their hearts pounding in their chests, unable to process the horror they were witnessing. In the final awful moments of this scene, Adim's role shifted from bystander to a central, terrifying figure. It was in the chaos and fear that he allegedly turned the gun on his own mother. The act was quick, brutal, and incomprehensible. The story of a domestic dispute had ended, and in its place, a new, far more tragic one had begun. The lives of everyone in that house were chained forever by the events of those few, terrible minutes. The argument between Tiffany and her boyfriend had reached its breaking point. Just as the verbal blows were at their peak, a deafening sound erupted through the house. It was not the crash of breaking glass or the slam of a door, but the terrifying, unmistakable report of a gunshot. The sound seemed to hang in the air for a moment, an unnatural pause in the screaming and shouting. It was a noise so final, so terrifying, that it seemed to silence the world itself, leaving only a ringing echo in the sudden, eerie quiet. The older brother, who had been watching the scene with a practiced, weary resignation, froze, his eyes wide with disbelief.
I don't want to hurt you, bro. I do not want to shoot you. Put it down. You don't want to end it this way. You don't want to end it this way, brother. I promise you. Whatever happened today, it can be fixed. Don't pull the trigger. Put it down. Adim, put it down, buddy. Don't do it, man. Put it down. Don't know what you're going to do. When you get to over here, I'm going to have you, listen to me, I'm going to have you lay down on the ground, and my gun is going in my holster, I promise you. If you will walk toward me.
Were fixed on the boyfriend. The boyfriend's body, moments before a coiled spring of anger, now seemed to betray a profound and sudden vulnerability. A look of shock, followed by a gasp of pain, crossed his face as he staggered back. The older brother's mind, unable to process the horror, struggled to make sense of what he had just witnessed. This was no longer just a fight. It was something far, far worse. The boyfriend crumpled to the floor, not with dramatic thud, but with a sickening heavy fall, a testament to the brutal force that had been unleashed. The older brother saw the dark stain spreading across his clothing, a stark and horrifying contrast to the bright sunlight streaming through a nearby window. The reality of the situation hit him like a physical blow. His mother's boyfriend had been shot. The sounds of a struggle and his mother's desperate cries were now replaced by the agonizing moans of a man in pain. For a brief, terrifying second, the world seemed to stop. Time stretched out, a silent, surreal tableau. The boyfriend lay on the floor, groaning, while Tiffany stood in a state of shock, her hands over her mouth. Adeem, at just 14, was a silent, unmoving figure, the firearm now a monstrous extension of his arm. The air, which moment ago was thick with rage, was now filled with chilling, profound silence broken only by the whimpers of the wounded man. The sudden act of violence had a ripple effect, shocking everyone into a moment of frozen paralysis.
Toward that thing, man. Walk toward me with your hands up. I'm going to walk you through every process. Please don't pick that back up. Please don't. Hey, one person talking. Please don't pick that back up. I got you. I'm telling you, I got you. Listen to how this will go. If you'll walk out to me with your hands up in the air. When you get to about right here, I'm going to have you lay down on the ground. My gun is going in the holster. Bet that. It's going in the holster. Don't pick it up, Hadim. Don't do it, buddy. Don't do it. You made such a good choice putting it down, bro. Just leave it on the ground, Hadim. Walk all the way out. All the way. Keep coming. Keep coming to me. Keep coming to me. Keep coming. I'm going to tell you when to stop. Keep coming to me, bud. Keep coming. Keep coming. Come on. You're good, bro. You're good. You're good. Keep walking toward me. Hadim, don't do it, bud. Keep on. Keep on. Keep on. Keep on. Keep coming toward me. Keep coming toward me. The pavement's going to be hot. What I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you lay down on the grass. Lay down on the grass. Lay down in the grass. Lay down in the grass. Lay down in the grass. Watch. Lay all the way down. My gun is going in its holster. Somebody's got cover. All right. Hey.
The anger that had fueled the argument dissipated, replaced by a cold wave of fear and disbelief. The older brother, his body now trembling, wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. He was watching a nightmare unfold in his own home, a place that was supposed to be safe. Every fiber of his being was screaming at him to run, to get help, to do something, anything, to break the spell of this terrifying moment. He saw his mother, Tiffany, now turning her attention from the wounded man on the floor to Adeem. Her face was a mixture of shock, terror, and an immense, heartbreaking sadness. It was as if she couldn't believe what her own eyes were telling her. The son she had raised, the boy who had just been a quiet presence in the background, was now holding a weapon, his face an unreadable mask. The older brother could hear his mother's pleas, now quiet and desperate, aimed at Adeem. She was begging him to stop, to put the gun down, to end this terrifying spiral. But the words seemed to have no effect. The reality of what had just happened was setting in, and when it came the terrifying realization that the violence was far from over, the boyfriend's groans grew fainter, a horrifying soundtrack to the scene. The older brother watched as the focus shifted entirely to the next horrifying act. The first shot had been the beginning, a point of no return.
18-year-old is facing felony charges tonight. Detectives say he shot and killed his mother and also shot her boyfriend. Annie Mapp is live in the Riverview neighborhood where it happened Saturday. Annie, what do you know tonight?
Stacey, detectives say this shooting happened during an argument between the victim and her boyfriend. I spoke to her family members off camera today, and they say this tragedy is heartbreaking, as not only have they lost that mother, but now her son is also facing time behind bars. Tiffany Harris was 39 years old and originally from Tallahassee. Detectives say her life was cut short after her own son shot her.
I can't ever imagine any dispute over anything being that important that you would murder your own mother.
Sheriff Chad Chronister says the 14-year-old male suspect also shot his mother's boyfriend 5 times. He was taken to a hospital and is now stable. Detectives say concerned neighbors called 911 after hearing the gunshots and seeing the teen running with a handgun in the Summerfield subdivision. I thought something serious must be happening because this is a quiet neighborhood, and never in the time that I've lived here with my daughter had we seen anything like this. Deputies who responded to the scene say the suspect threatened suicide. It took 16 minutes of negotiation and striking the teen with the projectile to get him into custody.
Lay down in the grass. Watch. Lay all the way down. My gun is going in its holster. Somebody's got cover.
Now the teen faces felony charges that include murder in the 2nd degree with a weapon, attempted murder in the 1st degree premeditated firearm, and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
This is one of nightmares. This is heartbreaking.
The sheriff's office is still investigating this incident, and of course, as we learn more details, we will have those for you on air and online. Stacey?
Curious, Annie, did the 14-year-old suspect have a criminal history?
Stacey, Sheriff Chad Chronister said this teen had no prior criminal history, and the only previous call registered to this home from the sheriff's office was for a report of a stolen vehicle.
It had set in motion a chain of events that would end in unimaginable tragedy, a darkness that had now fully consumed their once normal home. The older brother's mind reeled. He had just witnessed the unthinkable. His mother's boyfriend shot and lying wounded on the floor. His focus, however, was immediately drawn back to the terrifying reality of the present. All attention was now on Adeem, who stood in the middle of the room, a silent and unmoving figure. His mother, Tiffany, was trying to reach him, her voice a mix of pleading and raw terror as she begged him to stop, to put the gun down. But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The air, still thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder, was now charged with new, horrifying energy. The older brother saw his mother take a step forward, a gesture of desperate hope that she could somehow reach her son to pull him back from the precipice of this madness. It was a maternal instinct, a love so powerful it pushed aside all fear. She was a mother trying to save her child, but in doing so, she was stepping into the path of an unfolding tragedy. In that heart-stopping moment, the older brother's eyes locked onto Adeem's face. He saw not a child, but a stranger, a cold, hard mass of a person he no longer recognized. There was no rage, no remorse, only an eerie blankness. It was this chilling detachment that terrified the older brother more than anything else. He watched in slow motion as Adeem raised a firearm, not toward the boyfriend, but toward Tiffany. The second gunshot was just as loud, just as final as the first, but it carried a different, more terrible weight. The sound seemed to tear the very fabric of the house apart. It was a single, brutal note that punctuated the end of a life. The older brother's world imploded. He had just witnessed his younger brother, his own flesh and blood, commit the most unthinkable act. It was an image that would be forever burned into his memory, a moment of pure, unadulterated horror. Tiffany's body slumped to the floor. There was no theatrical fall, no dramatic cry. It was a simple, devastating collapse, a life force extinguished in an instant. The older brother could only stare, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were showing him. His mother, the light in their family, a person so full of life and love, was now gone. The stillness that followed was even more profound than before, a sacred, terrible silence that was filled with the weight of her absence. The older brother's grief was instantaneous and absolute, but it was quickly eclipsed by a primal, overwhelming fear. Adeem's head turned, and his gaze now fell upon him. In that moment, the older brother realized that he was now a witness to a murder, and his brother was the perpetrator. The terrifying thought was not that Adim would hurt him, but that he was capable of doing so without hesitation. The bond of brotherhood, which had been so strong, had shattered in the space of a few seconds. The horror of what he had just seen, coupled with the immediate danger he was in, ignited a powerful survival instinct. His mind, which had been frozen in shock, suddenly screamed at him to move, to get away, to find help. He had to escape this nightmare. He could not and would not be the next victim. He had to run. With a final, terrified glance at his mother's still form and his brother's empty eyes, the older brother turned and fled. He ran blindly, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate need to find safety. He ran out of the house, away from the scene of the crime, and into the afternoon sun, leaving behind a family and a life that had been destroyed by 2 gunshots. The older brother didn't hesitate. The image of Adim, gun now in hand, and gaze fixed on him, was all the motivation he needed. He bolted, not even bothering to look back. The sound of the shot still ringing in his ears, he ran with a primal, animalistic fear he had never known before. His feet pounded on the floorboards, each step a desperate cry for escape. He was no longer in his home. He was in a death trap, and his only goal was to get out. He burst through the front door, the afternoon sun a blinding shock after the darkness of the house. He didn't stop to think, didn't stop to breathe. He ran blindly, fueled by adrenaline and a deep-seated terror. He ran down the driveway, his heart hammering against his ribs. Each beat a frantic reminder of the life he had just seen extinguished. He could feel the weight of his mother's death and his brother's betrayal pressing down on him. But he couldn't afford to stop and process it. Not yet. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get as far away from that house as possible. He ran toward the neighbors, toward the possibility of safety and a connection to the outside world. He was a teenager in a world of adult horrors, and he instinctively knew he needed an adult to help him. He needed someone with a phone, someone who could call the police and bring this nightmare to an end. As he ran, he pulled his own phone from his pocket, his hand shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He fumbled with the screen, his fingers slick with sweat. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been this terrified. He wasn't just running from a monster. He was running from his own brother, from the person he had grown up with. It was an impossible, surreal reality that he was forced to endure. He finally managed to dial 911, his voice a broken, trembling mess. He couldn't form coherent sentences, only fragments of a story that sounded too horrific to be true. He was a boy in the middle of a suburb, trying to explain to a dispatcher that his brother had shot their mother and her boyfriend. The words came out in a jumble of panic and desperation, but they were enough. The dispatcher's calm, steady voice was a lifeline in a sea of terror. The dispatcher asked him questions, and he answered as best he could, his voice cracking with emotion. He was trying to give them the address, the details of the crime, and the description of the armed assailant, his own brother. The weight of this burden was immense. He was a witness, a victim, and now, a key informant in a murder investigation. All he wanted to do was curl up and cry, but he knew he couldn't stop now. He was their only hope. He reached the end of the street, his lungs burning, his legs screaming for rest. He stopped and leaned against a fence, gasping for air. He was safe for now, but the images from the house were still fresh in his mind. He could still hear the gunshots, still see his mother's body. The panic was still there, a live wire running through his veins, but now it was joined by a profound and overwhelming sadness. He had a brief moment of quiet, a single tear running down his cheek, before he was forced to turn back to the call. He remained on the line, listening as the dispatcher relayed the information to law enforcement. He could hear the sirens in the distance, a sound that was both a promise of rescue and a terrifying confirmation of the reality of his situation. He had fled his home, but he couldn't escape the nightmare he was now living. The police were coming, and with them, the beginning of a long and painful journey. The first wail of sirens cut through the suburban afternoon, a piercing sound that grew louder with every passing second. For the older brother, still on the phone with the dispatcher, it was both a terrifying sign of the end and a beacon of hope. For the neighborhood, it was a sudden, jarring intrusion, drawing curtains back and bringing curious faces to windows. What was once a quiet residential street was about to become a crime scene. The first patrol car screeched to a halt in front of the Harris home, followed almost instantly by another. Officers, their movements trained and precise, exited their vehicles with a grim determination. The air of urgency was palpable. They were responding to a domestic disturbance call that had escalated to a shooting, and every moment was critical. They had assumed the shooter was still inside, still armed, and still dangerous. As the officers began to secure the perimeter, they were met by the sight of the wounded boyfriend. He was outside the home, a shocking and immediate confirmation of the severity of the situation. He was conscious, but clearly in immense pain, his body betraying the trauma he had just endured. The officers, while maintaining a cautious distance from the house, quickly assessed his condition, providing initial aid while dispatching an ambulance. The scene was a tableau of chaos and control. Uniformed officers, with their radios crackling, moved with a calculated purpose. Their faces were set, their eyes scanning every window and door of the house. They were trained for moments like this, but the gravity of shooting, especially one involving a domestic dispute, was never lost on them. Every decision they made had to be precise, as lives, including their own, were at stake. The older brother, still nearby, watched as the scene unfolded. He could see the urgency in their movements, the way they moved as a coordinated unit. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic, terrifying scene he had just fled. He felt a small measure of relief, a sense that help was finally here, that the nightmare might soon be over. He could hear the officers' terse commands on their radios, a language of procedure and protocols that was foreign to him, but reassuring. A lead investigator, a seasoned detective, arrived on the scene. He took in the situation with a calm intensity, his eyes missing nothing. He moved toward the officers on the perimeter, his radio already in his hand, a look of grim resolve on his face. He knew that the most dangerous part of the situation lay ahead, confronting an armed suspect who had already shown a willingness to use violence. The first responders were a mix of emotions, professionalism, caution, and a palpable sense of urgency. The residential street, usually so serene, was now filled with the flashing of lights and the tense hum of police radios. Neighbors stood by their windows, their faces pale with shock. They had heard the sirens, seen the lights, and now they were watching as their quiet world was shattered by a very real and terrifying act of violence. With the boyfriend receiving medical attention and the perimeter secured, the officers turned their full attention to the house. They knew the shooter was still inside, and with a call about a second victim, they knew the situation was about to escalate. The police response was no longer just about securing a scene. It was about confronting a suspect, a task that would require every ounce of their training and courage. The stage was set for the next, most crucial phase of the crisis. The police had the house surrounded, their weapons drawn, and their movements deliberate. They had located the suspect, the 14-year-old boy named Adeem Berry, and the scene had immediately transitioned from a perimeter lockdown to a full-blown standoff. The officers trained for this very scenario took positions of cover, their voices now calm and authoritative, cutting through the tense silence. They had one objective: to end this without further bloodshed. Adeem was visible, but his actions were erratic and terrifying. He was armed, and his posture was defensive, his face a mixture of fear and despair. The most harrowing part of the scene, however, was his repeated motion of holding the firearm to his own head. It was a clear sign of his internal turmoil, a desperate and dangerous cry for help that no one in the world could prepare for. The officers knew they were not just dealing with a suspect. They were dealing with a deeply distressed child. The lead negotiator, his voice a calm and steady force, began to talk to Adeem. He didn't shout commands or threats. Instead, he spoke with a quiet authority. His words meant to de-escalate the situation, to build a bridge of communication. He identified himself, reassured the boy that they weren't there to hurt him, and tried to connect with him on a human level. "We just want to talk," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Put the gun down, and we can figure this out." The standoff was a psychological battle. Every minute felt like an hour. The officers held their positions, their hands on their weapons, their eyes never leaving Adeem. They watched his every move, every subtle change in his body language. They knew that one wrong word, one sudden movement, could push him over the edge. The air was thick with a palpable tension. The only sound to crackle the police radio and the steady, reassuring voice of the negotiator. Adim remained unresponsive for a long, agonizing time. He would lower the gun for a moment, only to raise it to his head again, his body language a silent, tormented conversation with himself. The officers' training took over, and they continued to use their de-escalation techniques. Their voices a soothing rhythm in the midst of a life-or-death crisis. They repeated phrases like, "We are here to help you, and it's going to be okay," hoping to break through the wall of despair he had built around himself. The standoff stretched on, a horrifying 16-minute eternity. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the normal sound of Saturday afternoon replaced by the tense silence of a police presence. For the officers on the scene, time seemed to slow down. They were not just police. They were human beings trying to save a child from himself. They knew the severity of the crimes he was suspected of, but they also saw the despair in his eyes. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, their efforts began to pay off. Adim's posture changed. The repeated motion of raising the gun to his head became less frequent. He seemed to be listening, truly listening to the negotiator's words. The tension began to ease, a thin thread of hope in a situation that had seemed so hopeless just moments before. The negotiator, seeing the shift, continued to speak with a calming urgency, encouraging the boy to take the next crucial step. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Adim lowered the firearm completely. His shoulders slumped, and a wave of exhaustion seemed to wash over him. The officers, with practiced precision, moved in. The standoff was over. The crisis was averted. The police had successfully de-escalated the situation, but the tragic reality of what had already transpired still hung in the air. The standoff was a victory, but a somber one, as the officers now had to proceed with the solemn task of a murder investigation. As the standoff with Adim was reaching its tense conclusion, other officers on the scene were performing a methodical search of the property. Their objective was grim but necessary, to confirm the reports of a second victim. While the negotiator worked to de-escalate the armed suspect, the search team moved with a quiet, professional precision, their radios relaying a constant stream of information back to the command center. They had to be thorough, but they also had to be fast. They moved from the main house to the surrounding structures, their flashlights cutting through the dim interior of a detached garage. The air inside was still and heavy. It smelled of motor oil and dust, a mundane scent that stood in jarring contrast to the horrific reality of their investigation. It was in this quiet, ordinary space that they made their devastating discovery. The officers found the body of Tiffany Harris. She was lying still, a tragic and final confirmation of the 911 calls. The sight was a sobering blow to even the most seasoned officers on the team. They were professionals trained to handle scenes of violence, but the sight of a mother, a beacon of light in her family, lying lifeless was a devastating reality check. The tension of the standoff was replaced by a profound and overwhelming sense of sadness. They immediately secured the scene, their movements now marked by a careful respect for the deceased. A solemn code word was radioed back to the command center, a terse and grim message that needed no further explanation. The search was over. The second victim had been found, and the tragedy of the day was now fully realized. The frantic search was replaced by the meticulous, methodical work of a crime scene investigation. The lead detective, a man with years of experience, arrived at the garage. He surveyed the scene with a quiet gravity. He had seen countless cases of violence, but each one carried its own unique weight. He took in the details, the position of the body, the signs of the struggle, and the silent narrative of a life cut tragically short. This was more than just a case file. It was the end of a person's life, and he was now tasked with piecing together the final moments of it. The reality of the situation was now solidified for everyone on the scene. The 911 calls had not been a misunderstanding or an exaggeration. They had been a terrifyingly accurate account of a murder. The domestic dispute had spiraled into an unthinkable act of violence, and the evidence was now laid out before them, a stark and brutal testament to the events that had just transpired. The scene in the garage was an emotional anchor, a grim focal point for all the chaos that had just unfolded. The standoff of the Adim had been a triumph of de-escalation, a life saved. But the discovery of Tiffany's body was a reminder that this was not a story with a happy ending. It was a tragedy from which there was no turning back. With the scene secured and the grim reality of the discovery settled, the police's focus shifted. The urgent, life-saving work was over. Now a new, equally critical phase was beginning. The long, arduous process of a murder investigation. The officers would collect evidence, document the scene, and begin the work of building a case against a 14-year-old boy. The silence in the garage was filled with the quiet, determined resolve of law enforcement, ready to see justice done. With the standoff over, the police moved swiftly to arrest Adeem Berry. He was cuffed and led away from the house, his face still a blank mask of exhaustion and despair. The armed boy who had held police at bay for 16 minutes was now just a teenager, a suspect in a heinous crime. The solemn procession from the house to the patrol car was a stark and tragic conclusion to the chaos. The crime scene was now secured, and the work of law enforcement had shifted from de-escalation to investigation. The older brother, who had fled the scene in terror, was now back with police. He was the key witness, and his account of the events was vital to the investigation. He gave his statement, his voice filled with a mixture of shock, grief, and confusion. He had lost his mother and his brother in the same terrible moment, and his words were a testament to the emotional devastation of the day. He was now a boy without a mother, and with a brother facing a lifetime in prison. News of the tragic event quickly spread throughout the community. Neighbors who had watched the police cars swarm the street in disbelief now learned the full, horrifying truth. A family they had known, a life they had seen every day, was gone. The shock was palpable, a chilling reminder of how close violence can be, even in a quiet, seemingly safe neighborhood. The community was left to grapple with the senselessness of it all, trying to understand how a domestic dispute could end in such a brutal tragedy. As the story was picked up by local and national news outlets, the public was introduced to Tiffany Harris not as a crime victim, but as a person. The article provided a heartbreaking tribute from her mother, Teresa Harris, who described her daughter as a light. She was loved by everyone, her mother said, a woman who always helped others even when she had limited resources herself. These words painted a picture of a vibrant life cut short, adding a profound sense of loss to the tragic narrative. Teresa Harris also touched on a larger issue, suggesting that people should be held responsible for keeping firearms accessible to children. Her words raised a difficult but necessary question about gun access and the role it plays in domestic tragedies. In her grief, she was trying to find meaning in the chaos, hoping that her daughter's death might serve as a catalyst for change, a plea for greater responsibility. Meanwhile, Adeem Berry was taken into custody. The legal system began its slow, methodical process. The charges were severe, 1 count of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. He would be tried as an adult, his youth doing little to diminish the gravity of the crimes he was accused of. The path ahead was long and complex, a legal battle that would unfold in the public eye, dissecting the final moments of a family's life. The aftermath of the shooting left a trail of emotional wreckage. The family, now broken, had to navigate a world without Tiffany and with Adeem behind bars. The older brother would forever be haunted by the images he saw, the sounds he heard, and the loss of both his mother and his brother in a single afternoon. The tragedy wasn't just a crime itself. It was a way that fractured a family, leaving behind profound and lasting grief. The case of Tiffany Harris and Adeem Berry serves as a stark and painful reminder of the hidden complexities within families. It is a story of love and violence, of hope and despair, and of a life cut short by a tragic mix of circumstances. The aftermath of the crime was not an end, but a beginning. The start of a long journey of grief, legal battles, and a search for understanding in the wake of an unthinkable act.